Gaywyck by Vincent Verga. Publisher Allison Books, Los Angeles, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 21. Although Denvers had removed the treasures from Key's rooms and the Botticelli from the music room, and most of the valuable books from the adjoining library wall, the smoke damage to Gaywyck was extensive. He had soaked Key's body with oil from the lamps and set it ablaze, then called Danough to lead the fight against the spreading conflagration. As soon as the village fire brigade arrived and the fire was under control, the two returned to my rooms. I, of course, was gone. Denvers then revealed the truth about Cormac and me, displaying the photograph he said Jones had taken. He claimed Cormac and I set the blaze to gain time for flight. Now it will be the way it was meant to be, just the two of us. Danough banished the demented old crone. He told me he did everything for me. Had Keys kill my father to spare me the shame. Brought you and Cormac together to show me what a whore you were. Or I wanted to strangle him. He knew you would not go with Cormac. He knew Cormac would kill you, then kill himself. He planned to have his revenge on you both for the death of Jones. Oh, Denvers, I whispered hoarsely. He must have hated himself beyond bearing. Why else would he fall in love with men he could never have? He was too long with the Jesuits. Danough laughed and kissed me. He had not laughed for days. It was good to see him doing something besides sighing and staring at my heavily bandaged face and neck. Dr. Anders was very liberal with the gauze. I think he was trying to tie me down. Denvers had lied about the Jesuits. He claimed his disenchantment with their intellectual standards forced his departure from the order, but in fact, it was they who cast him out, finding his obsession with the sufferings of Christ unhealthy. They needed a Latin scholar. Denvers was eager for the glories of martyrdom. He had come to Gaywyck and remained for one reason only: Mr. Gaylord. During their brief interview, Gaylord enticed and tantalized him. Overly proud of his virility, the twins' parents saw the attraction and tormented the shy, repressed man, charming him into a cruel submission, treating him like a precocious schoolboy who might one day have his way. It also worked with Everard Keyes. Gaylord thrived on their fanatical love, knowing it united them to one purpose: keeping the twins in line. He also knew their attachment was bereft of reason, but he never expected it to be the death of them. He failed to remember that wasps feed off their hosts, I whispered, and many a cobra has misread his mongoose. I became distressed. I had beseeched Danough to tell me, then found I was not yet ready to hear. He resumed reading Pride and Prejudice aloud for an hour before administering my medication and sternly ordering me to nap. He excused himself and returned to a study where he sat by the hour, perusing the journals of Julian Danvers and Cormac Gaylord Sr., found in Denver's rooms. Everything was calculated. Keith did his bidding. They kept tabs on their progress by reading your journals. Danough spoke as though giving a weather report. What power did Denvers have over Keys? Keys thought Cormac was dead, yes? Mm-hmm. He answered, having at some point adopted my speech mannerisms. To keep his accomplice quiet, Denvers told him Cormac died instead of Stephen. The deed sent Keys into paroxysms of guilt that deranged his mind. Had there been an autopsy after the fire, Denvers planned to blame the death on Cormac, whose flight was witnessed by the respectable Nanny Wells. Of course, I croaked, raising my hand to ask for a respite. Cormac Gaylord Jr. had seriously damaged me. I must not make light of it. He broke my nose and blackened my left eye. What with various contusions and damaged muscles in my neck and throat, swallowing and speech were made painful for over 2 months. There were great welts on my neck, a mean purple bruise under my left ear, where his thumb had lodged, and my cheek was swollen to the shape of a healthy cantaloupe. It was a miracle he hadn't fractured my jaw or knocked out my eye or uprooted a dozen teeth. But in the immediate aftermath of our confrontation. I found it difficult to be grateful for anything once I was over the relief of being alive. Swathed in bandages, I cried a great deal. It exasperated Danough, who, ever patient, insisted on changing the wet gauze every time. I blamed myself for everything that had happened. There were a million ifs. If you hadn't gone willingly, Danough comforted, he would have dragged you. You don't understand. Yes, I understand. It happened. It's over. I began to cry. The doctor became worried. My state of mind, he warned, was detrimental to the healing process. I would never recover if I did not eat and shake the depression that gripped me as tightly as Carmack's fist. On the fourth morning, Danough handed me a letter from Father Howard. My mother was recovering. Danough decided to bring her to Gaywyck. We're cousins, he revealed, grinning. He had just been informed of our connection by Father Howard, who was party to the deepest Gaylord secret, and who had clandestinely acted as intermediary between Mr. Gaylord and the family of Whyte. Mary Rose, Regan's twin, Mary Regan, disappeared from Boston Common one hot July afternoon in 1851, while their nurse, Clotilde Honeywell, dallied with the butcher's son on the far side of a great elm. Why only one child was snatched from the double carriage added to the controversy that made good copy in the newspapers. A huge reward was offered to every gypsy expelled from the city. There was a large convocation of gypsies in Boston and its environs that year. It was generally assumed that the child was abducted to beg or to dance for pennies or to climb through windows and rob the homes of respectable people. The child was never found. 32 years later, at the opening of the Metropolitan Opera House, Mary Rose Regan Gaylord was introduced by her confidant, Father Collins, to his friend from seminary days, Father Howard, who happened to be in New York City on parish business and who was a guest of James Cardinal Gibbons in the diocesan box. Stunned by our physical likenesses to his own parishioner's wife, my mother, he mentioned the coincidence to Father Collins, who mentioned it to Gaylord. The very next day, Stephen was dispatched to investigate Rose. Mary Regan was discovered living happily as Prudence Whyte in a small, comfortable town in upstate New York, a town practically owned by Gaylord Crude Oil Investments. They debated how best to manage the reunion when a moratorium was declared on the subject as Mary Rose became less and less well. Gaylord decided not to make us aware of the relationship, being loath to instigate fears of inherited mental weakness. Father Collins was requested to invite Father Howard to New York for a holiday. A meeting was arranged with Mr. Gaylord. The Whytes were to be assisted in every possible way, but was never to know. Under the aegis of Gaylord, my father quickly progressed from assistant schoolmaster to principal of the new school built by a private donation. The only other direct interception was the conscription of Mrs. Grammont to supply my voracious reader's appetite with books and literary journals. The shy recluse was asked by Father Howard to help ease my difficult adolescence, and she, dear friend, had been willing to do whatever was required. One of Gaylord's last acts was to set up a trust fund for me. Whatever career I chose was to be facilitated. There were to be no obstacles. Money could remove. If I had not won a scholarship to Harvard, a sponsor was to come forward and eventually be credited with leaving me an annuity in his will upon my graduation. My mother's sudden collapse and my refusal to go the expected route complicated matters for Father Howard, who was appointed upon the death of Gaylord executor of my trust. He wrote to Father Collins, who hastily applied to Danough Gaylord for advice, assuming him cognizant of my history. Weary of stressing familial allegiance lest there be none, he stuck to my history. Danough offered the position of librarian without asking questions, touched that young Robert Whyte's mother's gone mad. He had been totally unaware he was under obligation to an unknown cousin languishing in the foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. He was recently returned from a month in Ireland and was distracted by the mounds of work. He had been relieved the business with Father Collins was so amicably dispatched in under 10 minutes. The most important 10 minutes of my life, he added, kissing my hand. How large is my trust fund? I asked, patting his hand. Very large. My father was absurdly generous. Does it still exist? What do you take me for? He shouted in mock amazement. So, I'm no longer a poor relation dependent on charity? Correct. Couldn't be more attractive. What are you going to do with your newfound wealth? Paint this room. We had moved into the cottage because the necessary repairs begun on the main house made it impossible for me to rest, and Dr. Anders had insisted I sleep days on end, or, as usual, he would not be held accountable. He suggested my removal to a hospital, but I refused to leave Danough. I had become so agitated that he relented on certain conditions. 1. Sleep, days on end. 2. Brian was to nurse me and provide a special diet. 3. A throat specialist was to see me immediately. 4. Danough Gaylord was to remain at Gaywyck. Margaret Davis was entreated to augment the staff. She arrived immediately with her 3 children, insisting it was no inconvenience, assuming the responsibilities of housekeeper. She assured Danough she would manage quite well with Brian's able assistance. They managed brilliantly. In 2 days, the entire cottage was cleaned, as when Danough had lived there. The second-floor parlor with the great wych elm outside its windows was my bedroom, until the first night, when I pronounced it ours. I did not want separate bedrooms. I wanted him by my side. I did not want a cot brought in for him. I wanted us in one bed. What do you want, Danough? Is it too soon? No. We could have separate rooms if you wish. No. Why? The world's disapprobation. Life is a breath, too short to worry about the world's disapprobation. Mrs. Davis decided it would be best if she lived in the main house for the time being. Mary Rose had been settled into my old quarters, and there was such a tremendous amount of work to be done that the housekeeper preferred to be close to the disorder. I had no complaints about being far from the children. You don't mean it, Danough insisted. Yes, I do. I dislike children because they frighten me. They're so complicated and noisy and demanding. Too demanding. All that attention. I've always disliked children. Children and dogs. Robbie! It's true. Dogs are just like children. They're stupid and noisy and demand attention. And shit all over the floor. Cats say it would be in your best interest to love me. Dogs say, love me, love me, love me. Well, now that we've settled that... Do you mind terribly? I croaked, hugging Cale. Obviously not about children, but I rather like dogs. Very soon after this conversation, I happened to glance out the window during my breakfast. A small boy of about 5 years, shadowed by a tiny black terrier, stalked Tristan and Isolde. The boy carried a bow and arrow, taut, all ready for action. I could not shout. My voice was barely producing normal tones. Brian had returned to the main house. Joshua was fishing. Danough was at the farm. The downstairs maid was downstairs, and my swans were about to be slaughtered. Luckily, Danough insisted I wear a heavy nightshirt during the days, otherwise naked. I could have done serious damage to myself as I clambered down the wych elm, rushing across the lawn. Through the flowering wild thyme, I waved my arms to the delight of the boy, who lowered the arrow and saved himself from being throttled or directly drowned. I'm hunting, he announced proudly. The puppy licked my bare feet. I lifted it. It had a beautiful face with large brown eyes and short, erect ears. There were flecks of gold in its curly black fur. I put the puppy down. Cale hissed and howled. I lifted the puppy until Cale collected himself. People don't hunt swans, I said, trying to look stern behind my mask of bandages and trying to be heard over Cale's disgraceful ruckus. The child had huge eyes and, fortunately, resembled his mother. Why? He asked. Because swans are our friends. At the sight of me, Tristan and Isolde were leading their family over to see if I had some food. They traveled slowly, weary of Cale's temper. The child was delighted to see them approach. What do people hunt? In the house, rats, bats, mosquitoes, flies, wasps, little boys, and dogs. He laughed. I was charmed. His teeth were good. And outside, only what they need to eat. Can you eat swans? No, swans are tough, like cats. He nodded thoughtfully. I wondered if there was anything else I should specifically designate as tough. One must hunt rats only with people who know their prey's tricks, or one can get hurt. Where did you get that bow and arrow? I found it. See? Uh-huh. Did anyone say you could use it? He shook his head. May I have it, please? You're going to tell my mom? She'll paste me. Oh, no. Why should I? We all make mistakes. He handed me the bow and arrow. What's your name? I asked. Robert. So is mine. I knew 2 kids in the city called Bobby. Well, I've never had a friend named Robert before. Oh, what's prayer's tricks? Excuse me? I asked, on my best example setting behavior. You said you had to know a prayer's tricks to hunt. Prayer's tricks? I muttered dumbly, growing uncomfortable. Yeah, you said, oh, you mean a prey's tricks. P-R-E-Y, prey. That means an animal you hunt. To prey. I clasped my hands and glanced at the clouds. This is to prey. They're homonyms. They sound alike, but have different meanings. There are lots of words like that. Oh, yeah? Yeah. Buy and buy. I mimed the different meanings and spelled the different words for the kid who seemed enthralled. Time and time. Children and dogs, Danough suggested over my shoulder. Oh, Mr. Gaylord. I assume you know Robert Davis. Yes, we met. Your mother has been looking for you, young man, he said to Robert, who turned and scurried away. Wait, I called, straining my throat. Robert! Danough shouted for me. The boy stopped and nervously glanced over his shoulder. I ran to him and relinquished the sleeping puppy. You forgot this, I said, smiling. Come and visit me sometime. I live in the cottage. I know where you live, he said. And I know what happened to you, too. Oh, you got throwed by a horse. Yes, I said, sweetly making a mental note to tell Brian I was not amused. Going hunting? Danough queried as on our way back to our room. The kid nearly killed Tristan. Look at Cale shredding the lilac bush. He's furious with me. I think you made a friend. Isn't it odd his name should be Robert? No. If it were Hans or Vincenzio. Robert became a frequent visitor to our home. Of the 3 Davis children, I discovered an affinity with this middle one, who was charming and intelligent and soon loved to read. It was I who encouraged his interest in medicine. He grew up to become a fine neurosurgeon. His child, Roberta, my goddaughter, seems to be following her father's footsteps, but I digress. I have just skipped decades. I considered reading more of Denver's journal after luncheon. Robert, please don't, Danough insisted. Oh, you're angry with me? I'm not angry with you, said Danough finally. Why aren't you? My anger is past. I was silenced because tears were imminent and the bandages fresh. I grasped his hand and asked him to tell me about the people who had raised my mother. He had written to Father Howard asking for information about my Quaker grandparents. My mother, Father Howard, responded, declared her parents dead when they informed her she was a foundling. She had accused them of unspeakable treachery for not having told her from the beginning. She married my father to be free of them. My mother came to live in Gaywyck. She and her sister became companions. Unlike Mary Rose, who was quite mad quite often, my mother suffered from depression that debilitated but never disoriented her. She found her sister's company remarkably beneficial. They became mistresses of the main house, entertaining the 2 prelates. My grandparents, my Aunt Emily, Sister Theresa, recently made Mother Superior of her convent, and Miss Vermont, who, keeping her promise to Danough, came for a week and stayed 6 months. I brooded about Denver's and composed journal entries to fathom what seemed to be idiocy and bravado, but filled me with pity and terror. Mary Rose gave me the clue when she said Gaylord's rejection had unhinged him. Closeted with his passion, he festered. Everyone was made to suffer for his self-dread and loathing, which the alchemy of egotism converted into anger. He was not what he seemed. He knew his value, yet Cormac received Gaylord's love, and I received Danough's. He wanted us both removed. He railed against his fate. Everything was beyond his control. But the lives of others, trying to destroy Gaywyck after his last attempt to dupe Danough, failed. He was devoured by teeth of flames with the journals. We discovered his several fingers lovingly mummified in a Fabergé cigar case, studded with amethyst, the color of his grief, the color of his rage. The first weekend during my recovery, I was gratified by the sudden appearance of Goodbody and Mortimer. Goodbody brought me a huge Whitman sampler box of chocolates. I know how fond you are of the man. And a gigantic bouquet of peonies. I was grateful to them for being there, for I had not been able to discuss Cormac's death rationally with Danough, and I was certain he was grieving horribly, but had not wished to burden me. He consistently dismissed my queries with a casual response. I thought his friends might console him where I could not. And there was another reason, a more personal one. The moment Goodbody and I were alone, I opened discussion. Have you always been faithful to Mortimer? Good Lord, what a question, Robbie. You know, about me and Cormac. Yes, Danough told us. I hope you don't mind. He hadn't intended to, but it was impossible not to relate. No, I don't mind. I'm glad, in fact. I don't ever want to have any secrets from you, Goodbody. You must call me Timothy, Robbie. Yeah, I will. Thank you. Chocolate. No, they're for you. Danough said you weren't eating. I thought they might fatten you up. I love chocolate. Good. Now, your question. I don't see why you're upset. You thought you were with Danough. At least that's... Until the last time, the night of the fire, I knew he was Cormac then. I see. I loved him. Yes, I see. There was a long pause. I felt on the verge of distress again and distracted myself by locating caramels with the help of the chart on the lid of the box. This question had been tormenting me. Before I discussed it with Danough, I wanted to have some thoughts, besides guilty ones, on the subject. Timothy, I've tried to think of it in terms of wanting Danough and needing Cormac, but I need Danough and I wanted Cormac too. Yes, those nice differentiations aren't much help at times like this. They're fine for dallying, but not for understanding motivation, which is usually too complicated for such simple fare. You know it isn't a question of guilt or innocence. No. I don't. I feel terribly guilty. Why? If I love him, why should I want someone else? You think love focuses sexual attraction? I think it should. Then I understood it was my unwillingness to accept the boundaries of love. I was confused by the slightest change of direction on the carte d'itinéraire. I explained this to Timothy, adding, I'll have to think of it. Love can do things. If we love ourselves, we can use it to change ourselves. Yes, but it doesn't just happen. Once you realize you want a monogamous relationship, it then acquires force and meaning of its own. Nothing should bind us together but love. Now, we can discuss wanting and needing. I know many men who stay together because they have houses and carriages and mutual investment funds. I love you, Jean, yes. I've been faithful, as you call it, but only because I want to be. It isn't always easy, trust me. There are many attractive men in this world, but I love you, Jean. He is the best for me, and sharing my body is connected to everything else. There aren't many monogamous love relationships of our kind, Robbie, but then there aren't many in marriage either, and fewer by choice. It's what I want. Yes, it's what Danough wants too. What if you should meet someone who is better for you? God knows. If that happens, I'll confront it then. Life is full of what ifs. Chance and change? Exactly. Something else to be afraid of instead of just living our lives. And that night in Danough's arms, I felt as if a great weight had been hoisted off my heart. I did not feel guilty anymore. I felt wiser. And I felt wonderful. I'm relieved to feel the tension gone, he said. I sighed, snuggling closer. You were pleased to see Goodbody and Mortimer? Oh, yes. Did you get a chance to talk with Mortimer? What about? I thought you might be able to talk with him about Cormac. You don't have to tell me about your feelings if you don't want. I understand. No. You don't, my dearest boy. I've told you how I feel. You haven't, Danough. You've said nothing about him. I'm all right. I am. How do you feel? All right. He laughed, squeezing me tightly. All right was not distraught or untangled or any of the things he had been the first time Cormac died. All right was calm, saddened, accepting. He was not ill. He was not hallucinating, and the world was not two-dimensional or colorless. A black and white photograph in motion, having a replica of oneself, a different being, yet in many ways the same, was conducive to infantile oneness. They were everything to themselves. They trespassed on each other's souls as they had shared and divided the same ovium. It had taken him 3 years of psychic laboring to experience life as a separate being. With the help of doctors in Paris and Vienna, he had gradually seen himself as one whole person, and not as a reflection of another. When Cormac died, Danough's self-image expired. Last week, I wasn't afraid of Cormac, he whispered. I was afraid of what I would allow him to do with me. I needn't have worried. I'm all right. My dearest boy, that is how I feel. I grieve that we will never meet as men, but I have forgiven myself and mourned for us both. The next morning brought a glorious summer day. A cloudless, lilac-scented sky and a spectacularly clear sea were reported by Danough at breakfast. It was agreed I was strong enough to picnic at the cove. I was not to swim, wade, perhaps, but I could sit and walk, slowly, and toss a football, indolently. Just as I was finishing my last cup of tea, Brian and Joshua and Lonnie brought in my Cezanne. The Crivelli already hung in our room. I wanted the Cezanne on the wall opposite the bed, not in the sitting room, where it had originally been settled. It was easily accomplished. When the three had gone, I asked Danough what his first impression of me had been. Your eyes totally disarmed me, he whispered, stretching out on the bed by my side. And then I thought you were trying to impress me with your enthusiasm for my pictures. You took me for a sycophant. An overeager beauty, I thought. Can you forgive me, my dearest boy? I remember your scent. You smelled like autumn flowers. You are lovely, Danough Gaylord. Take off your clothes. He blushed and looked shocked. I could read amusement in his eyes, even though he had not yet adjusted to my new boldness. The shy recluse was no more. Would he miss him? He looked away, then returned my stare to see if I were serious. We had done a great deal of laughing this morning before breakfast, and we hadn't much time before the picnic. He grinned a wide and foolish grin. I was so full of love for him, so serene about the way we were, the way we thought, the way we felt, that I burst into laughter. I love you so much. It just washed over me like a great wave. He took me in his arms. I cried with fine gusto. When I pulled back from his shoulder to take the napkin from my breakfast tray, I saw he was weeping. I love you, he said. I love you. We probably would have spent a teary, laughing morning if Mortimer had not called from the garden, bemoaning the loss of the day's best moments. I dressed quickly, and we joined our friends under the rain tree. Danough had not exaggerated the splendor of the morning, except for my brief excursion to rescue Tristan and Isolde. I had not been out of bed for a week. Goodbody was in high spirits. He sang a bawdy ditty about a judge and a jury, and then pounced on the peonies blooming by the pond, and with a courtly bow, presented me with one. Donnie says there are your favorite flowers. How lovely of them to be in bloom for you now. They are my favorite too, and I'm always anxious to make converts. I wish someone would develop a strain with a longer blooming season. They aren't with us long enough, and please, no metaphysics. I was reminded of Denver's and Keys, and felt saddened and diminished by the loss of them. Goodbody and Mortimer had accompanied Danough to a service for the two tutors in the village the previous afternoon. Danough must have felt a similar loneliness, because he put his arm around my shoulders and hugged me to him. "You've grown more," he whispered. "You're nearly as tall as I." I nodded, pleased. I was soon to become a man of equal measure. "Nature," laughed Goodbody, "is so natural." "Very profound, Goodbody. It is, you know, Mortimer. At the club the other day, while awaiting you, I overheard two asinine gents discussing Wilde's illness. They said there are unnatural goings in nature. They're incorrect. Priori and posteriori. Indeed they are. Goodbody, I beg your pardon." Reaching the sand at the instant, I broke free to test the temperature of the sea. Fortunately, it felt good and uninviting. I had prepared an argument for why I should be allowed a short swim. Down by the jetty, Brian and Mrs. Davis played a game of catch with her two sons, while Robert struggled to raise a box kite, and Annie Wells sat on the rocks knitting. The nurse had resumed residence in the main house. Her former third-floor quarters were operating as nursery for the three boys, on an outing that morning to allow the newly painted dado to dry. "They look like a marvelously healthy, happy family," Mortimer observed. 1 year later, practically to the day, Brian and Margaret Davis were married. Their courtship is one of the finest, most enduring memories of our first year together. Their evident happiness was a variation on our own, and carried love from the cottage into the main house, and over the 300 acres of Gaywyck. Danough gave the bride away. I was the best man. When they left for a honeymoon in Ireland, I complained that I had never seen Ireland. 1 month later, Danough and I left for a year abroad, with more adventures and happiness than I could relate in 100 volumes. Their first child they named Danough Robert. On the beach that growing morning, we joined in their games. Robert and I lifted the papered frame into the wind. Aloft, it provoked applause and seemed to shudder with our excitement. "I want to fly." "So do I." "Why can't I fly?" "No wings." "Why not?" "We have a thumb that wiggles instead. A tinsel digit. If we had wings, we couldn't fly this kite. You gotta make do, kid." When we parted from them to continue our walk, I told Danough how much I enjoyed their company. He smiled as if presented with a gift. Ever since our conversation about children and dogs, I feared I had made a dreadful error inviting Mrs. Davis and the boys to live here. Now I'm certain things will work out. "Children and dogs?" Mortimer asked, frowning. "What kind of American are you? I'd hate to handle your case in court." Those halcyon days, full of fruit blossoms and sunshine, knew but 2 dark hours. The one I spent with the journals of Julian Denver's, the other asking questions of Danough because I could not bear to read more. "Just tell me quickly how he knew your father was leaving." Stephen told him. The last night, Denver's heard Stephen arriving and went to meet him. Gaylord had sent him a letter agreeing to go abroad. Stephen showed Denver's the letter, thinking the tutor would be pleased for them. Having no idea, Denver's had offered himself as slave to Gaylord that very afternoon, and been laughed out of the room. Keys poisoned the brandy they used for a farewell toast. I went under the covers, wanting to go under the bed, and would have stayed there if Danough had not insisted we walk and ride the horses. I was pitched into another foul depression and gripped by fear. The devious workings of the human mind terrified me. My tendency toward depression was a manifestation I could not understand. Depression covered my other feelings like a mask. The face would the mask endure? Had I inherited the Reagan legacy? Was I destined to crumble slowly into madness? While we walked, he offered comfort, but His tenderness tormented me. How much of his love was a response to this weakness within me? Was it love he felt, or pity? Perhaps my mother had been right. Had he recognized in me a displaced feminine soul? I could not speak to him. I could not verbalize any of it. He guided me to the oakstead and told me we would not return to the house until I explained myself. "Why do you love me?" I asked, hoping it would lead me to the rest. "I love you because you are the man you are." As usual, his choice of words was perfect. Could I ever be a wife to you?" I forced myself to utter, compressing a dozen queries and turning plum-colored from the effort. "God, no. We are both men. We cannot be otherwise with one another, or we will be untrue to ourselves. We will share our lives. I have seen men who wish to be women and wives to other men. It isn't possible." What will I be?" "You will be Robert, my comrade in perfect manhood. And if I go mad, I have already entered death's dominion once. Aren't you afraid?" "Madness is fearful, yes. There are many doctors now who offer theories contradicting heredity. I take my hope there and trust in my strengths." "I'll save you from..." "You'll save me from what?" "From hearing promises I cannot possibly keep." "Dearest boy, you are a promise kept." On the way back to our room, we met Goodbody and Mortimer, riding along the shore. They offered to dismount and join us, but we excused ourselves and wished them good exercise. "I'm tired and thirsty," I complained to Mortimer unbidden. He reached into his vest pocket and offered me the flask I had given him for Christmas. "No, thank you. Too early for me." "It's Saratoga mineral water," he said, chuckling at my surprise. I drank a toast to us, thanked him, and took my leave. "No more toasting Jefferson Davis?" I asked Danough. There had been little drinking on this visit. None of that requisite Manhattans or brandies or wines before dinner and after each lavish meal. I had been too self-absorbed to take it as anything but a gesture to my uninterest in alcohol. "Mortimer has stopped drinking?" "Completely. Yes, he's had a difficult time of it these past 6 months." "I didn't know." "He's doing well. He's fine now." My ignorance saddened me. "I want to know everything about everyone," I sighed. "No, you don't. It would make life unbearable. It's hard enough remaining ambulatory knowing about oneself." We laughed and hurried back to our room. We had grown closer to one another and found it easier to share more of our private realities. We spoke frequently of Cormac to exorcise his ghost. He was buried near the dolmen. We would sit by him and talk of love our shadows won. I returned with Danough to Gramercy Park in the autumn. He had his work. It was unreasonable for me to expect him to retire to Gaywyck. He was deeply involved with the Gaylord enterprises. They intrigued and gratified him. He was not interested in becoming a country gentleman. He was an urban creature. The cultural pleasures of Gotham were the axis of his life. I wanted to share in all of it. At first, I lacked an aptitude for finance. Leisure was most appealing. Then I learned. Reader, you might never infer from the memoir that I am abundant in the rare and precious commodity known as common sense. Undeniably, I possess the ability to look at two items and see them both, to store them and find them again, to combine them and make two, to connect them and perpetrate a synthesis. In times, I became his efficient deputy, dividing their responsibilities. It was my ideal to eliminate the less lucrative peripheral businesses' interests rather than embrace Taylorism. I convinced Danough to found the Gaylord Foundation as a means of distributing the yearly profits more efficiently. The foundation has become our primary interest. On our second New Year's Eve together, 1901, we joined Goodbody and Mortimer at the opera. It was a performance of Tristan and Isolde. Again, I was profoundly moved. We parted from our friends in front of the Opera House and walked up the snow-decked streets, through the throngs of other happy couples to our bridge in Central Park. That evening, Danough informed me he had begun the business of adoption. He wanted my name to be Robert Whyte Gaylord, in the eyes of the law. We would share one another. Privilege and duty would deftly conjoin. Snow began to fall as we stood on the bridge spanning the frozen pond. The full moon blessed us as we leaned together, dizzy from the weight of our love. "I'll gladly be your friend, Danough Gaylord, till death do us part." "Not beyond that, Robert Whyte. Not to the edge of doom. Like an ever-fixed mark. Not admit impediments. Never, never." Bells began to ring all over the town. It was midnight. We kissed and discovered each of us laughing. "This is for all our time, Danough Gaylord. Yes, yes, I say yes. For all our time, time out of mind." Epilogue. 6 January 1969. Gaywyck. Danough Gaylord died at midnight. He looked up at me, surprised. Bells tolled. The sea continued. Our love endures. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.